and welcome to the Therapy Corner. At the Therapy Corner, what we like to do is enlighten, educate, demystify all things that are of psychological nature. That includes anything in the research, anything we do therapeutically, anything that we do to help people to have a better life. Today we have a very special guest. She comes to us from Israel, and Avigail Gimpel is a educator in Israel, and she is going to talk to us today about ADHD and I believe parenting ADHD. Correct, Abigail? Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. That is my topic.
All right. Well, let's dig right into it because as I told you before the show, I've got ADHD, but I didn't know it till later on, and I'm sure my parents could have helped me a heck of a lot in the beginning. I understand you just wrote a book. Why don't you tell us a little about that?
Absolutely. So my book, Hyper Healing, it's right here. I love the cover. Isn't that cute? That could easily be my children. So it starts by me being a mom of 6 kids. And as I was teaching in the school that my oldest daughter was learning in. And as I was teaching one class, I'd watch her fly by in socks, in the hallway. And the principal would call me in and say, Abigail, your daughter is acting differently than the other children. And I'd say, oh, no, she's wonderful. Don't worry about it. Everything's great. And this was actually when we were living in Moscow, Russia. I didn't tell you that. We lived in Russia for a couple of years. And when we came back to Israel for, the teacher said, you got to get your kid evaluated. And I take her to the evaluation. We're having a great time, discussing things with each other in the waiting room. And she's in a glorious mood. And we get into the doctor, and the doctor, presses a printer button. My daughter leaps out of her seat to help the doctor by handing her the document that came out of the printer. And the doctor finally looks up at us and says, slam dunk ADHD. And I'm like, that's it? That's the whole story? She says, yeah, here's your prescription and we'll do a follow-up in 6 months. Any questions? I'm like, yeah, 4,000 questions. But that was that. And, starting from there, it was kind of like a combination of roller coaster, collision course, lots of research, couple of bouts of tears of anger, frustration, fear for my own children. And as a special education teacher, I finally got a grip and started taking a real deep dive into what was going on. I had already been teaching kids with ADHD way back since I'm 20 years old. But suddenly it was personal because it was my own kids. And I felt like they were being pathologized and put into a box that they didn't belong in, told that they were unhealthy in some way. And in order to really advocate for my kids, for my students, for my clients, I started building a program. And the book is really the culmination of a tremendous amount of research and also trial and error. There's no programs in there that I didn't try. My older son always jokes that we're your lab rats, I guess, but a little bit. But it turned out well. We got some great programs. And what I discovered with my family and with my clients and students is that these kids are healthy children, and there's a clash between their personality and their environment. And there are many, many different environmental factors and personality factors that are causing these ADHD symptoms to emerge. And the simplicity of the, neurological explanation to ADHD was way too simple and way too one-dimensional, and we needed to flesh that out. So out of respect for these healthy kids, out of respect for all the parents everywhere, I felt like I had to put my entire program into a book. And this is something that parents can use for deeper understanding and also to follow the entire program. It's all there. And it's well organized. And even parents who have ADHD themselves can follow it because I put the cliff notes in the book.
Wow. A couple of things that triggered some thoughts in my head as you were talking. One, which I find really, really important, because I've said to my clients, I said, I wouldn't say anything to you that I wouldn't do myself or have done myself. And the fact that you've got 6 children and you have children with ADHD, and you said this is personal, it means a lot to me, because it says this book isn't some ideological, academician just running off the top of their head. You lived it. So that's really, I think, important for people to hear. The other thing that struck me was when you said the pathologizing. Oh, yeah. I had heard, and I don't know if it's changed. I teach psychology at the college here, but for years I used to say that over in France, they don't see ADHD as a disorder. They consider that a normal part of childhood. Now, I don't know if that's changed in the years that I've been teaching, but it used to be that way, and I agree with it. I don't like the idea of pathologizing ADHD. Stephen Tonti does a wonderful little TED Talk on ADHD, and he really brings out this, that it's not that we're dysfunctional, we have a different way of thinking, of processing information. Would you care to talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So let me address the French thing for a second, and then I'll go right over it. If the French definitely have much, much lower diagnosis percentages. America is out of control. You have 18% of high school boys being diagnosed. It might be higher by now with ADHD, it's outrageous. It means, that's a big fail for the school system.
Right.
If, more than 15% of your students are not managing to sit in classes because you're not engaging them somehow. So it's not possible that many kids are defective. It's just not. But in France, the diagnosis is lower. But it just recently started the semester here, and I'm teaching in a college called Herzog College. And one of my students came over to me afterwards. She said she's French, and where she comes from, you're either lazy or smart. And she says that it's a very big problem. Whereas they see it as a regular part of childhood development, they also don't give these kids enough support. And she said, her cousin was diagnosed and he just fell right through the cracks and did not get the help he needed. She was talking about medication, but I was thinking, that he didn't get the help he needed, meaning it wasn't recognized as a different way of thinking. It wasn't recognized as this clash we were talking about. And so we need something in the middle. Although I highly respect the French notion that it's part of childhood, but it's a different part of childhood. And just like a part of childhood would be a child who's very shy or a child who has dyslexia, every single one of these has to be addressed in the most respectful way to the kid. In terms of the different way of thinking, what I call that is instant gratification personality, which is the wanting to, does that ring true for you?
Yeah. I want what I want and I want it now.
Exactly. It's the fast, it's the interesting, it's the now, it's the fun. And, so parents say to me, my kid should know how to get out of bed. He's been getting out of bed for 2,000 mornings. Like, why does he not get out of bed in the morning? I say, because there's nothing drawing him out of bed. There's nothing interesting, fun. And it's very interesting and fun for him to stay in bed. So when you have a clash in this kind of personality between what I'm doing right now is fantastic, and you want me to get cold, get out of bed, and then go to school, which is, there's no promise there. It's empty. It's horrifying. I'm not going there. So every single morning there's a brand new battle. It's like, I call it the battle of the shower, where the kid's perfectly happy playing. And then you by the time the kid finally gets into the shower, the kid's in tears, mom's in tears, everything's a disaster. And then you turn the hot water on, you can't get the kid out of the shower because he's so happy. My daughter used to run all the hot water out of the entire neighborhood by the time she was done singing every single, song she could think of from Disney. So basically what we're dealing with is a personality that's a healthy personality. It's a creative personality. It's a personality that sees things that the rest of us just don't. I miss the things my kids catch on to, and they put things together in the most clever way, which is why I loved my students when I was teaching in the classroom. I love those students who talked to me at recess and they would point out things that no one else noticed. So they're catching all the details. What happens once the excitement is kind of wears out, we lose them. So therefore, no person is self-contained. We need the scientists, we need the innovators, we need the people with the sharp, great ideas, and we need to pair them with the accountants. And then we have a team. But what these kids are missing is habits. And that's the main thing that's going on here. When you're always looking for novelty, what you don't want to do is repeat things over and over again. It's very hard for you to repeat things. So you understand me. It's very hard to repeat things over and over again. And if you don't repeat things over and over again, you don't create a habit. So my work is helping these incredibly healthy, creative kids, often with higher IQs than their peers, start using what they have, which is that curiosity and creativity, which we immediately kill the minute they enter school. And I try to save the personality and add to it the ability to create systems and habits and stick to things that are very important, and be able to manage transition. And also socially, you go from one friend to the next, and you're not taking the time to get to know a friend. When it gets a little boring, when it gets a little challenging, you run away. Music, you want a kid who's musical to stick it through until it becomes fun. And so all these things are very hard for those kids. But if we keep in mind that that's a healthy child, then we'll know that the child can do it, but that's their weak muscle. Like a shy kid has a weak muscle when it comes to socializing. We wouldn't put a shy kid on a daily dose of alcohol in order to make that kid dance on the tables and not be shy. And I think the same would be true. We'd have to think 10 times before taking a healthy child with an instant gratification personality and trying to stuff that into something that he's not.
I'm glad you said that, because again, you triggered something in me when you were talking about that. I was born in Denmark, and so I was raised European, very strict. And so there was no room for my ADHD. There was no room for that. You learned to sit still or you got smacked. And not wanting to get smacked, I sat still, which was incredibly difficult for me. But I did. The problem was, the expectation was there that when I went to school, I would also sit still. Well, the mind is going. So I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't doing well. And the teachers, because this goes to speak to the intelligence thing, the teachers told my parents they thought I was developmentally delayed. That's the term nowadays. Back then, they thought I was retarded, and so they said, you better take him to a psychologist and get him tested. Well, no, I was well above average. I won't glorify myself here, but I was well above average. Okay.
It's a gift from God. Enjoy that.
Amen. And so it was interesting, because what you have to understand, the school system back then, that's the other thing I want to talk about real quick. The school system back then was geared to everybody had to have the same education, which means there was nothing there for kids who wanted to be challenged. There was nothing there for kids who wanted to really grow and develop. Nope, everybody had to be the same, which was frustrating, okay? So I agree with you. The problem here, especially in America, I think, is we stifle the creativity. We haven't encouraged arts. We haven't encouraged the music and all that. It's like, no, that's not important. Go over there and learn math. It's like, no. So what do you think we need to do?
As a teacher, it would have been fun to have you in my classroom. I guess the years are a little bit off. But what I got some great advice as a young teacher from this principal. We had these in-service days where we had to sit for hours and hours and suffer like we made our students suffer. And but there were some interesting speakers, and this one, excellent principal. He gets up on stage and he says, "The best reward for hard work is," and he stops, and we're throwing out all sorts of ideas, and we all got it wrong. And he says, "Nope, it's hard work." It's more work, more work. And I say, this guy's crazy.
Yeah.
You think, hard work, you want to rest, you want to be patted on the back, you want to get extra recess. But no, he says it's more hard work. So, okay, let me see if that actually works in the classroom. And being young and malleable, I decided I'd give it a try. So I set up an enrichment corner. And I said to my students, and I was actually teaching all boys in an Orthodox Jewish elementary school. And I said to my students, once you finish the work you have to do, let's say a math assignment or whatever it was we were doing, and I tried to engage the students and make it specifically for my ADHD symptomed students. I made sure that I had their interest in the subject always. So they couldn't ask me, why do I have to know this? What does this have to do with my life? Because before we even began the subject, we already answered that question. This has to do with you because, and it became personal and they were involved. But I said to them, when you finish your work, you get to get up, go to the corner and take out any kind of activity worksheet that you'd like and sit back down and do it. And my students were throwing each other over to get to the corner.
Yeah.
There was no reward. It was just them being able to do something that was very interesting to them. It was all educational.
Right.
And it was all in completely different areas of education. So some were reading, writing, math, brain teasers, writing, building things, there was some tactile stuff. And that's all they wanted to do. And there was no party at the end. They had a joy in showing each other how thick their folder was, how many papers they had taken. But it kept my classroom very dynamic, and the students were just learning all the time, sometimes together, sometimes on their own, but there was also a lot of choice in there. And it worked like a dream. And I think that that's very important, that we allow in our classroom for space for each child to choose and at their own level, and that will protect the curiosity.
Yeah, that's the part that I see so, I don't know, blunted, maybe the right word, in so many kids nowadays. And it's like when I teach my psychology course, I tell them there's 3 principles here I want you to learn through the whole semester. I said, be curious, be skeptical, be humble, because you could be wrong. But nice. Curiosity, please don't just accept. I even tell them, don't believe a word I say. Check it up on Google if you want. Yeah. Don't just sit there and accept things,
Right. I have students at the beginning of the semester raising their hand and saying, do we have to take notes? And I'm like, that's up to you if you would like to take notes or not. What you must do is think and be involved and ask questions and get angry at me and, throw something at me if you really get angry. But your notes, they're still in this, that, you must do what the teacher says. And I said, right. You guys are in college.
Right.
If taking notes is good for you and feels right, then do it.
I had when I was in graduate school, this is kind of a funny aside, I had a graduate school professor who, at the beginning, in regards to taking notes, said the difference between an undergraduate and a graduate student is that in the undergraduate class, the professor comes in and says good morning, and the class says good morning. In graduate school, the professor comes in and says good morning, and they all write it down.
Oh, God, that's really bad.
Yeah. But I feel like I agree with you. We've gotten to that place where it's like, how rigid can you get? It's like, why aren't we allowing children to, forgive me for a minute, but, I had a flashback to Montessori schools, which became very popular at one time. And sorry, it's ancient history for me as well, because I'm 72 years old. But
many Montessori is still flourishing.
Is it still? Because I don't hear it so much over here, which is sad, because I think, isn't that sort of based on the same principles that you're talking about, allowing the child to sort of explore and learn?
It's a discovery learning. I would take it slightly in a different direction, but it's definitely a good base.
Right. Okay. All right. So I'm going to really put it on you here. So what does a parent do with a kid who's got ADHD?
Well, my first advice always is to take a deep breath, calm down, relax, know that your child is healthy, and know that your child is going to be okay, that he has a varied personality that's very much welcomed and needed in this world. And then we have to, I mean, in my book, I actually start with parents. The first 3 chapters is for the parent themselves, not for the child at all. We don't mention the child until we get to chapter 4. And that's because we are carrying these tremendous, heavy suitcases on our backs called all of our junk that we've been, from our own childhoods, the old messages that we got. You're talking about your very strict childhood. And, I told you beforehand, I come from a more German background, not particularly complimentary, overflowing with, you're the best, go you. There's not much of that going on in these German homes. And, so we all have that. We all have our own failures. We all have a tremendous amount of fear that our kids are going to fail or they're going to humiliate us. So we have to first get in touch with what's bothering us in the kindest, most loving way, not critically, because that puts us right back into another cycle of, throwing more baggage into our little suitcase there, or large suitcase, depending on the person. So first we have to calm ourselves down and realize that we are not to blame for our kids' symptoms, and we didn't cause them, but we can contribute to making them worse. And we have a big place in making them better, because we're talking about a clash between environment and child. We're our kids' environment. That's what we are. And therefore, we can make it or break it, but we also can make loads of mistakes. Let's be real here. Parenting has a lot of space for mistakes and mess ups. And thank God we have more than one kid, so that, we mess up the first, we carry on. But, but that's first. We first deal with our own voices, our own fears, our own need for perfection, which overtakes all of us tremendously, and it's a disaster. And then we move into starting to figure out what is going on with this child. Is it a screen addiction? Is it a physiological issue? Like, does this child have asthma, allergies, autoimmune condition, all sorts of other physiological rashes, things like that, constant runny nose. And then we would have to treat that physiologically, because that would be the environmental cause, which, I have a full chapter of what I call the 30-day challenge to help kids clean up their diet, clean their gut, because the gut-brain connection is too tremendous to ignore. We have to clear the gut in order for the brain to start functioning well. Happy to put you on a diet if you'd like. And but we're also working on the instant gratification personality, which has many chapters, because we're talking about creating healthy boundaries, and we're talking about helping a child create these habits that we mentioned before. And we're talking about proper discipline. A child like this is going to get away with whatever they can, because they're looking for the fight. They're looking for it to be clever. And I love that about them. That makes them so alive and vibrant. But we fall into having sympathy for them. Oh, poor child. No, it's not a poor child. It's a healthy child. Stop having so much sympathy. If we feel sorry for our child, the child turns into a sorry child. Not that. We've got to shut that part down and expect our child to succeed. And so healthy discipline is a big part of that. So we have the instant gratification. We have the physiological. We have screen addictions, which is a big one, causing huge amounts of ADHD symptoms. I highly recommend putting a filter on kids' screens and a screen diet as well. So we're doing a lot of dieting. And then we have a program. Obviously, we have as a response to trauma or abuse, children will also develop ADHD symptoms. We just talked about that before this interview. We talked about the ACEs, and the ACEs are all of these adverse childhood experiences that kids go through, and they're carrying that, and that will lead them to exhibit all of these ADHD symptoms. We have sleep as a big issue. So we as parents first have to begin with a journey of curiosity. What is happening with this child? So don't jump into any kind of hysterical program. Just first ask, and then find out and ask your child. Engage in a conversation with your child. We also have a fixed mindset that will lead to ADHD symptoms as well. So we first take a little journey to figure out what's happening, and then we choose the right kind of intervention programs, which are very well organized and available to parents. And I highly recommend that parents do this as a group. So we're choosing a chapter and you're reading it for homework, and then you're getting together to discuss how you're going to implement it. And then you're checking on each other. How's it going? How's it worked? You're having dialogue, WhatsApp group, and then you're meeting physically to cheer each other on, to share stories, to share wisdom. And that's really the best way to go through it. It's almost like an AA meeting, but not really, because you're giving each other support, but you're also constantly gaining new information. And I run those kind of groups here as well as online, because that's the best way to, I think, for all parents to learn. We used to grow up in a village. Yeah. And here in Israel, we have our Arab cousins. They grow up in what's called a chamula. They grow up with the whole family together. And my Arab friends, they live with they get married and they move into the family home, but they build another little kind of wing onto the home. So the mother-in-law is there and the sisters-in-law are there, and they're all contributing to the raising of the next generation. And that's the way we should have it. And we don't have that now, but it's the most natural way to do it. So
no, I agree. Yeah, no, I agree with you. My wife is Filipino, and she was a really a great introduction into the collectivistic society which they belong to, just as you're describing with the Arabs. And you go over to where her family lives in the Philippines, and on this one street, you just see the one house in the front. No, it's like a hectare, I think they call it, not an acre of land, and there's 6 houses on there. It's all family members.
Right.
Right. And
it could get hairy, but on the other hand, kids grow up in a much more natural.
Oh, absolutely. Everybody's babysitting for everybody else's kids. It's very wonderful, and it's warm and engaging. I mean, one Christmas I went there, and I tell my students, I said, there's this picture of me sitting with a baby in my lap. My wife's next to me, and there are 35 family members standing around us. 35. Pretty amazing. So
it sounds like a bumbling, bustling Jewish family also. I've got 7 siblings. So
there you go. So what
when we have a family get together, it's 35. That's small. we fill a house.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to get away from what you said, because it is so important. Yes, family, the groups, the ability to support one another and review with each other the different ways of dealing with the children. And most importantly, I'm sorry, I'm really going to underline this one. Most importantly, there's nothing wrong with the child. They're not defective. In many ways, as you said earlier, oftentimes they're very gifted and very intelligent. They just need to be appreciated.
Yeah, we need the patience. We need to find their gifts. And we also need to help them strengthen their weak muscles, just like we would do with any child we're raising.
Amen.
Their weak muscles are no more defective than anyone else's. They're just different.
Okay, well, listen, Abigail, it's been just an incredible pleasure speaking to you. And I realize it's nighttime over there in Israel, and it's just morning here. So we're beginning our day and you're ending your day. Anyway, thank you so much. Again, this is Avigail Gimpel, and she's an educator in Israel, and she's written a book. You go ahead and hold it up again there so people can see it.
There we are.
There it is, Hyper Healing, the Empowered Parent's Complete Guide to Raising a Healthy Child with ADHD Symptoms. Okay, thank you again for watching the Therapy Corner. Appreciate your tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Take care and stay well.
Thank you so much.